Section 1 of Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Harry Haller's Records. For Madmen Only. Part 1. The day had gone by just as days go by. I had killed it in accordance with my primitive and retiring way of life. I had worked for an hour or two and perused the pages of old books. I had had pains for 2 hours, as elderly people do. I had taken a powder and been very glad when the pains consented to disappear. I had lain in a hot bath and absorbed its kindly warmth. 3 times the post had come with undesired letters and circulars to look through. I had done my breathing exercises, but found it convenient today to omit the thought exercises. I had been for an hour's walk and seen the loveliest feathery cloud patterns penciled against the sky. That was very delightful. So was the reading of the old books. So was the lying in the warm bath. But, taken all in all, it had not been exactly a day of rapture. No, it had not even been a day brightened with happiness and joy. Rather, it had been just one of those days which for a long while now had fallen to my lot. The moderately pleasant, the wholly bearable and tolerable, lukewarm days of a discontented middle-aged man. Days without special pains, without special cares, without particular worry, without despair. Days which put the question quietly of their own accord whether the time has not come to follow the example of Adalbert Stifter and have a fatal accident while shaving. He who has known the other days, the angry ones of gout attacks, or those with that wicked headache rooted behind the eyeballs that casts a spell on every nerve of eye and ear with a fiendish delight and torture, or soul-destroying, evil days of inward vacancy and despair, when, on this distracted earth, sucked dry by the vampires of finance, the world of men and of so-called culture grins back at us with the lying, vulgar, brazen glamour of a fair, and dogs us with the persistence of an emetic. And when all is concentrated and focused to the last pitch of the intolerable upon your own sick self, he who has known these days of hell may be content indeed with normal half-and-half days like today. Thankfully, you sit by the warm stove. Thankfully, you assure yourself as you read your morning paper that another day has come and no war broken out, no new dictatorship has been set up, no peculiarly disgusting scandal been unveiled in the worlds of politics or finance. Thankfully, you tune the strings of your moldering lyre to a moderated, to a passably joyful, nay, to an even delighted psalm of thanksgiving, and with it bore your quiet, flabby, and slightly muzzy half-and-half god of contentment. And in the thick, warm air of a contented boredom and very welcome painlessness, the nodding mandarin of a half-and-half god and the nodding middle-aged gentleman who sings his muffled psalm look as like each other as 2 peas. There is much to be said for contentment and painlessness, for these bearable and submissive days on which neither pain nor pleasure is audible, but pass by whispering and on tiptoe. But the worst of it is that it is just the contentment that I cannot endure. After a short time it fills me with irrepressible hatred and nausea. In desperation I have to escape and throw myself on the road to pleasure, or, if that cannot be, on the road to pain. When I have neither pleasure nor pain, and have been breathing for a while the lukewarm, insipid air of these so-called good and tolerable days, I feel so bad in my childish soul that I smash my moldering lyre of thanksgiving in the face of the slumbering god of contentment, and would rather feel the very devil burn in me than this warmth of a well-heated room. A wild longing for strong emotions and sensations seethes in me, a rage against this toneless, flat, normal, and sterile life. I have a mad impulse to smash something, a warehouse, perhaps, or a cathedral, or myself, to commit outrages, to pull off the wigs of a few revered idols, to provide a few rebellious schoolboys with the longed-for ticket to Hamburg, or to stand 1 or 2 representatives of the established order on their heads. For what I have always hated and detested and cursed above all things was this contentment, this healthiness and comfort, this carefully preserved optimism of the middle classes, this fat and prosperous brood of mediocrity. It was in such a mood, then, that I finished this not intolerable and very ordinary day, as dusk set in. I did not end it in a manner becoming a rather ailing man and go to bed tempted by a hot water bottle. Instead, I put on my shoes ill-humoredly, discontented and disgusted with the little work I had done, and went out into the dark and foggy streets to drink what men, according to an old convention, call a glass of wine, at the sign of the steel helmet. In this plight, then, I went down the steep stairs from my attic cell among strangers, those smug and well-brushed stairs of a 3-story house, let as 3 flats to highly respectable families. I don't know how it comes about, but I, the homeless Steppenwolf, the solitary, the hater of life's petty conventions, always take up my quarters in just such houses as this. It is an old weakness of mine. I live neither in palatial houses, nor in those of the humble poor, but instead and deliberately in these respectable and wearisome and spotless middle-class homes, which smell of turpentine and soap, and where there is a panic if you bang the door or come in with dirty shoes. The love of this atmosphere comes, no doubt, from the days of my childhood, and a secret yearning I have for something homelike drives me, though with little hope, to follow the same old stupid road. Then again, I like the contrast between my lonely, loveless, hunted, and thoroughly disorderly existence in this middle-class family life. I like to breathe in on the stairs this odor of quiet and order, of cleanliness and respectable domesticity. There is something in it that touches me in spite of my hatred for all it stands for. I like to step across the threshold of my room and leave it suddenly behind, to see instead cigar ash and wine bottles among the heaped-up books, and there is nothing but disorder and neglect, and where everything, books, manuscript, thoughts, is marked and saturated with the plight of lonely men, with the problem of existence, and with the yearning after a new orientation for an age that has lost its bearings. And now I came to the Oracaria. I must tell you that on the first floor of this house the stairs pass by a little vestibule at the entrance to a flat which, I am convinced, is even more spotlessly swept and garnished than the others, for this little vestibule shines with a superhuman housewifery. It is a little temple of order. On the parquet floor, where it seems desecration to tread, are 2 elegant stands, and on each a large pot. In the one grows an azalea, in the other a stately Oracaria, a thriving, straight-grown baby tree, a perfect specimen which to the last needle of the topmost twig reflects the pride of frequent ablutions. Sometimes, when I know that I am unobserved, I use this place as a temple. I take my seat on a step of the stairs above the Oracaria, and, resting a while with folded hands, I contemplate this little garden of order, and let the touching air it has and its somewhat ridiculous loneliness move me to the depths of my soul. I imagine behind this vestibule, in the sacred shadow, one may say, of the Oracaria, a home full of shining mahogany, and a life full of sound respectability, early rising, attention to duty, restrained but cheerful family gatherings, Sunday church-going, early to bed. Affecting light-heartedness, I trod the moist pavements of the narrow streets. As though in tears and veiled, the lamps glimmered through the chill gloom and sucked their reflections slowly from the wet ground. The forgotten years of my youth came back to me. How I used to love the dark, sad evenings of late autumn and winter. How eagerly I imbibed their moods of loneliness and melancholy when, wrapped in my cloak, I strode for half the night through rain and storm, through the leafless winter landscape, lonely enough then, too, but full of deep joy, and full of poetry which later I wrote down by candlelight, sitting on the edge of my bed. All that was past now. The cup was emptied and would never be filled again. Was that a matter for regret? No, I did not regret the past. My regret was for the present day, for all the countless hours and days that I lost in mere passivity, and that brought me nothing, not even the shocks of awakening. But thank God, there were exceptions. There were, now and then, though rarely, the hours that brought the welcome shock, pulled down the walls and brought me back again from my wanderings to the living heart of the world. Sadly, and yet deeply moved, I set myself to recall the last of these experiences. It was at a concert of lovely old music. After 2 or 3 notes of the piano, the door was opened of a sudden to the other world. I sped through heaven and saw God at work. I suffered holy pains. I dropped all my defenses and was afraid of nothing in the world. I accepted all things, and to all things I gave up my heart. It did not last very long, a quarter of an hour perhaps, but it returned to me in a dream at night, and since through all the barren days I caught a glimpse of it now and then. Sometimes for a minute or two I saw it clearly, threading my life like a divine and golden track, but nearly always it was blurred in dirt and dust. Then again it gleamed out in golden sparks as though never to be lost again, and yet was soon quite lost once more. Once it happened as I lay awake at night that I suddenly spoke in verses so beautiful and strange that I did not venture to think of writing them down, and then in the morning they vanished, and yet they lay hidden within me like the hard kernel within an old brittle husk. Once it came to me while reading a poet, while pondering a thought of Descartes, of Pascal. Again it shone out and drove its gold track far into the sky, while I was in the presence of my beloved. Ah, but it is hard to find this track of the divine in the midst of this life we lead, in this besotted, humdrum age of spiritual blindness, with its architecture, its business, its politics, its men. How could I fail to be a lone wolf and an uncouth hermit, as I did not share one of its aims nor understand one of its pleasures? I cannot remain for long in either theater or picture house. I can scarcely read a paper, seldom a modern book. I cannot understand what pleasures and joys they are that drive people to the overcrowded railways and hotels, and to the packed cafes with the suffocating and oppressive music, to the bars and variety entertainments, to world exhibitions, to the Corsos. I cannot understand nor share these joys, though they are within my reach, for which thousands of others strive. On the other hand, what happens to me in my rare hours of joy, what for me is bliss and life and ecstasy and exaltation, the world in general seeks at most in imagination. In life it finds it absurd. And in fact, if the world is right, if this music of the cafes, these mass enjoyments, and these Americanized men who are pleased with so little are right, then I am wrong, I am crazy. I am in truth the Steppenwolf that I often call myself, that beast astray who finds neither home nor joy, nor nourishment in a world that is strange and incomprehensible to him. With these familiar thoughts I went along the wet street through one of the quietest and oldest quarters of the town. On the opposite side there stood in the darkness an old stone wall which I always noticed with pleasure. Old and serene, it stood between a little church and an old hospital, and often during the day I let my eyes rest on its rough surface. There were few such quiet and peaceful spaces in the center of the town where from every square foot some lawyer or quack or doctor or barber or chiropodist shouted his name at you. This time, too, the wall was peaceful and serene, and yet something was altered in it. I was amazed to see a small and pretty doorway with a Gothic arch in the middle of the wall, for I could not make up my mind whether this doorway had always been there, or whether it had just been made. It looked old without a doubt, very old. Apparently this closed portal with its door of blackened wood had opened hundreds of years ago onto a sleepy convent yard, and did so still even though the convent was no longer there. Probably I had seen it 100 times and simply not noticed it. Perhaps it had been painted afresh and caught my eye for that reason. I paused to examine it from where I stood without crossing over, as the street between was so deep in mud and water. From the sidewalk where I stood and looked across, it seemed to me in the dim light that a garland, or something gaily colored, was festooned round the doorway, and now that I looked more closely I saw over the portal a bright shield, on which it seemed to me there was something written. I strained my eyes, and at last, in spite of the mud and puddles, went across, and there, over the door, I saw a stain showing up faintly on the gray-green of the wall, and over the stain bright letters dancing, and then disappearing, returning and vanishing once more. So that's it, thought I. They've disfigured this good old wall with an electric sign. Meanwhile I deciphered one or two of the letters as they appeared again for an instant, but they were hard to read even by guesswork, for they came with very irregular spaces between them and very faintly, and then abruptly vanished. Whoever hoped for any result from a display like that was not very smart. He was a Steppenwolf, poor fellow. Why have his letters playing on this old wall in the darkest alley of the old town on a wet night, with not a soul passing by? And why were they so fleeting, so fitful and illegible? But wait, at last I succeeded in catching several words on end. They were Magic Theater, entrance not for everybody. I tried to open the door, but the heavy old latch would not stir. The display, too, was over. It had suddenly ceased, sadly convinced of its uselessness. I took a few steps back, landing deep into the mud, but no more letters came. The display was over. For a long time I stood waiting in the mud, but in vain. Then, when I had given up and gone back to the alley, a few colored letters were dropped here and there, reflected on the asphalt in front of me. I read, "For madmen only." My feet were wet, and I was chilled to the bone. Nevertheless, I stood waiting, nothing more. But while I waited, thinking how prettily the letters had danced in their ghostly fashion over the damp wall and the black sheen of the asphalt, a fragment of my former thoughts came suddenly to my mind. The similarity to the track of shining gold which suddenly vanishes and cannot be found. I was freezing and walked on following that track in my dreams, longing too for that doorway to an enchanted theater, which was for madmen only. Meanwhile, I had reached the marketplace, where there is never a lack of evening entertainments. At every other step were placards and posters with their various attractions: ladies' orchestra, variete, cinema, ball. But none of these were for me. They were for everybody, for those normal persons whom I saw crowding every entrance. In spite of that, my sadness was a little lightened. I had had a greeting from another world, and a few dancing colored letters had played upon my soul and sounded its secret strings. A glimmer of the golden track had been visible once again. I sought out the little ancient tavern where nothing had altered since my first visit to this town a good 25 years before. Even the landlady was the same as then, and many of the patrons who sat there in those days sat there still at the same places before the same glasses. There I took refuge. True, it was only a refuge, something like the one on the stairs opposite the Oracaria. Here, too, I found neither home nor company, nothing but a seat from which to view a stage where strange people played strange parts. None the less, the quiet of the place was worth something. No crowds, no music. Only a few peaceful townsfolk at bare wooden tables. No marble, no enamel, no plush, no brass, and before each his evening glass of good old wine. Perhaps this company of habitués, all of whom I knew by sight, were all regular Philistines, and had in their Philistine dwellings their altars of the home dedicated to sheepish idols of contentment. Perhaps, too, they were solitary fellows who had been sidetracked, quiet, thoughtful topers of bankrupt ideals, lone wolves and poor devils like me. I could not say. Either homesickness or disappointment or need of change drew them there. The married to recover the atmosphere of his bachelor days, the old official to recall his student years. All of them were silent, and all were drinkers who would rather, like me, sit before a pint of Alsacer than listen to a ladies' orchestra. Here I cast anchor for an hour, or it might be 2. With the first sip of Alsacer, I realized that I had eaten nothing that day since my morning roll. It is remarkable, all that men can swallow. For a good 10 minutes I read a newspaper. I allowed the spirit of an irresponsible man who chews and munches another's words in his mouth, and gives them out again undigested, to enter into me through my eyes. I absorbed a whole column of it, and then I devoured a large piece cut from the liver of a slaughtered calf. Odd indeed. The best was the Alsacer. I am not fond, for every day at least, of racy, heady wines that diffuse a potent charm and have their own particular flavor. What I like the best is a clean, light, modest country vintage of no special name. One can carry plenty of it, and it has the good and homely flavor of the land, and of earth and sky and woods. A pint of Alsacer and a piece of good bread is the best of all meals. By this time, however, I had already eaten my portion of liver. an unusual indulgence for me, as I seldom eat meat. And the second pint had been set before me. And this too was odd, that somewhere in a green valley vines were tended by good strong fellows, and the wine pressed so that here and there in the world, far away, a few disappointed, quietly drinking townsfolk and feckless Steppenwolves could sip a little heart and courage from their glasses. For me, at least, the charm worked. As I thought again of that newspaper article and its jumble of words, a refreshing laughter rose in me, and suddenly the forgotten melody of those notes of the piano came back to me again. It soared aloft like a soap bubble, reflecting the whole world in miniature on its rainbow surface, and then softly burst. Could I be altogether lost when that heavenly little melody had been secretly rooted within me, and now put forth its lovely bloom with all its tender hues? I might be a beast astray, with no sense of its environment, yet there was some meaning in my foolish life. Something in me gave an answer and was the receiver of those distant calls from worlds far above. In my brain were stored 1,000 pictures. Giotto's flock of angels from the blue vaulting of a little church in Padua, and near them walked Hamlet and the garlanded Ophelia, fair similitudes of all sadness and misunderstanding in the world. And there stood Genoso, the aeronaut, in his burning balloon, and blew a blast on his horn, Attila carrying his new headgear in his hand, and the Borobudur reared its soaring sculpture in the air. And though all these figures lived in 1,000 other hearts as well, there were 10,000 more unknown pictures and tunes there which had no dwelling place but in me, no eyes to see, no ears to hear them but mine. The old hospital wall with its gray-green weathering, its cracks and stains in which 1,000 frescoes could be fancied. Who responded to it? Who looked into its soul? Who loved it? Who found the charm of its colors ever delicately dying away? The old books of the monks, softly illumined with their miniatures, and the books of the German poets of 200 and 100 years ago whom their own folk had forgotten, all the thumbed and damp-stained volumes and the works in print and manuscripts of the old composers, the stout and yellowing music sheets dreaming their music through a winter's sleep. Who heard their spirited, their roguish and yearning tones? Who carried through a world estranged from them a heart full of their spirit and their charm? Who still remembered that slender cypress on a hill over Gubbio, that, though split and riven by a fall of stone, yet held fast to life and put forth with its last resources a new sparse tuft at top? Who read by night above the Rhine the cloud script of the drifting mists? It was the Steppenwolf. And who over the ruins of his life pursued its fleeting, fluttering significance, while he suffered its seeming meaninglessness and lived its seeming madness, and who hoped in secret at the last turn of the labyrinth of chaos for revelation and God's presence? I held my hand over my glass when the landlady wanted to fill it once more and got up. I needed no more wine. The golden trail was blazed, and I was reminded of the eternal, and of Mozart, and the stars. For an hour I could breathe once more and live and face existence, without the need to suffer torment, fear, or shame. A cold wind was sifting the fine rain as I went out into the deserted street. It drove the drops with a patter against the street lamps where they glimmered with a glassy sparkle. And now, whither? If I had had a magic wand at this moment, I should have conjured up a small and charming Louis Seize music room, where a few musicians would have played me 2 or 3 pieces of Handel and Mozart. I was in the very mood for it, and would have sipped the cool and noble music as gods sip nectar. Oh, if I had had a friend at this moment, a friend in an attic room, dreaming by candlelight and with a violin lying ready at his hand. How I should have slipped up to him in his quiet hour, noiselessly climbing the winding stair to take him by surprise, and then with talk and music we should have held heavenly festival throughout the night. Once in years gone by I had often known such happiness, but this too time had taken away. Withered years lay between those days and now. I loitered as I wended my way homeward, turned up my collar and struck my stick on the wet pavement. However long I lingered outside, I should find myself all too soon in my top-floor room, my makeshift home, which I could neither love nor do without. For the time had gone by when I could spend a wet winter's night in the open. And now my prayer was not to let the good mood the evening had given me be spoilt, neither by the rain, nor by gout, nor by the Oricaria. And though there was no chamber music to be had, nor a lonely friend with his violin, still that lovely melody was in my head, and I could play it through to myself after a fashion, humming the rhythm of it as I drew my breath. Reflecting thus, I walked on and on. Yes, even without the chamber music and the friend. How foolish to wear oneself out in vain longing for warmth. Solitude is independence. It had been my wish, and with the years I had attained it. It was cold. Oh, cold enough. But it was also still, wonderfully still, and vast like the cold stillness of space in which the stars revolve. From a dance hall there met me as I passed by the strains of lively jazz music, hot and raw as the steam of raw flesh. I stopped a moment. This kind of music, much as I detested it, had always had a secret charm for me. It was repugnant to me, and yet 10 times preferable to all the academic music of the day. For me, too, its raw and savage gaiety reached an underworld of instinct, and breathed a simple, honest sensuality. I stood for a moment on the scent, smelling this shrill and blood-raw music, sniffing the atmosphere of the hall angrily and hankering after it a little too. One half of this music, the melody, was all pomade and sugar and sentimentality. The other half was savage, temperamental, and vigorous. Yet the two went artlessly well together and made a whole. It was the music of decline. There must have been such music in Rome under the later emperors. Compared with Bach and Mozart and real music, it was naturally a miserable affair. But so was all our art, all our thought, all our makeshift culture in comparison with real culture. And this music had the merit of a great sincerity. Amiably and unblushingly negroid, it had the mood of childlike happiness. There was something of the nigger in it, something of the American, who with all his strength seems so boyishly fresh and childlike to us Europeans. Was Europe to become the same? Was it on the way already? Were we, the old connoisseurs, the reverers of Europe as it used to be, of genuine music and poetry as once they were, nothing but a pig-headed minority suffering from a complex neurosis, whom tomorrow would forget or deride? Was all that we called culture, spirit, soul, all that we called beautiful and sacred nothing but a ghost long dead, which only a few fools like us took for true and living? Had it perhaps indeed never been true and living? Had all that we poor fools bothered our heads about never been anything but a phantom? I was now in the old quarter of the town. The little church stood up dim and gray and unreal. At once the experience of the evening came back to me. The mysterious Gothic doorway, the mysterious tablet above it, and the illuminated letters dancing in mockery. How did the writing run? Entrance not for everybody, and for madmen only. I scrutinized the old wall opposite in the secret hope that the magic night might begin again. The writing invite me, the madman. The little doorway give me admittance. There perhaps lay my desire, and there perhaps would my music be played. The dark stone wall looked back at me with composure, shut off in a deep twilight, sunk in a dream of its own. And there was no gateway anywhere, and no pointed arch, only the dark, unbroken masonry. With a smile I went on, giving it a friendly nod. Sleep well. I will not awake you. The time will come when you will be pulled down or plastered with covetous advertisements, but for the present there you stand, beautiful and quiet as ever, and I love you for it. From the black mouth of an alley a man appeared with startling suddenness at my elbow, a lone man going his homeward way with weary step. He wore a cap and a blue blouse, and above his shoulders he carried a signboard fixed on a pole, and in front of him an open tray suspended by straps, such as peddlers carry at fairs. He walked on warily in front of me without looking round. Otherwise I should have bidden him a good evening and given him a cigar. I tried to read the device on his standard, a red signboard on a pole, in the light of the next lamp, but it swayed to and fro, and I could decipher nothing. Then I called out and asked him to let me read his placard. He stopped and held his pole a little steadier. Then I could read the dancing, reeling letters. Anarchist Evening Entertainment. Magic Theater. Entrance not for everybody. "I've been looking for you," I shouted with delight. "What is this evening entertainment? Where is it? When?" He was already walking on. "Not for everybody," he said dully with a sleepy voice. He had had enough. He was for home, and on he went. "Stop!" I cried and ran after him. "What have you got there in your box? I want to buy something from you." Without stopping, the man felt mechanically in his box, pulled out a little book, and held it out to me. I took it quickly and put it in my pocket. While I felt for the buttons of my coat to get out some money, he turned in at a doorway, shut the door behind him, and disappeared. His heavy steps rang on a flagged yard, and then on wooden stairs, and then I heard no more. And suddenly I too felt very tired. It came over me that it must be very late, and high time to go home. I walked on faster, and following the road to the suburb, I was soon in my own neighborhood among the well-kept gardens, where in clean little apartment houses behind lawn and ivy are the dwellings of officialdom and people of modest means. Passing the ivy and the grass and the little fir tree, I reached the door of the house, found the keyhole in the switch, slipped past the glazed doors and the polished cupboards and the potted plants, and unlocked the door of my room, my little pretense of a home, where the armchair and the stove, the ink-pot and the paint-box, Novalis and Dostoevsky, awaited me just as do the mother or the wife, the children, maids, dogs, and cats, in the case of more sensible people. As I threw off my wet coat, I came upon the little book and took it out. It was one of those little books wretchedly printed on wretched paper that are sold at fairs. Were you born in January? Or How to be 20 years younger in a week? However, when I settled myself in my armchair and put on my glasses, it was with great astonishment and a sudden sense of impending fate that I read the title on the cover of this companion volume to fortune-telling booklets. Treatise on the Steppenwolf, not for everybody. I read the contents at a sitting with an engrossing interest that deepened page by page. End of Section 1.